Stranger Things is finally back. We just got season 4, part 1, and I really enjoyed this season, and I also loved how they leaned more into the horror aspects of the show. I'm a big fan of horror, so I didn't mind that at all. And the main antagonist, Vecna, I thought was very well realized. I loved his overall design, his skeletal features, and root-like tentacles writhing over his body. And the Duffer Brothers, the show creators, have always been pretty outspoken in their influences and inspirations from the 80s and particularly 80s horror. So in this video, I wanted to take a closer look at some of the icons from 80s horror that influenced the making of the Vecna character. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Warning, there will be spoilers in this review. 1. Freddy Krueger. In Season 4, Vecna and Freddy Krueger are literally identified through the casting of Robert Englund, who played Freddy Krueger. He's cast as Victor Creel, the father of Henry Creel, who would become Vecna. Robert Englund's casting is definitely winking at the audience as if to say, yeah, Freddy Krueger is definitely the father of Vecna. Let's look at the similarities between Vecna and Freddy Krueger. One of Vecna's primary powers is his ability to alter reality. He is able to take possession of people's minds and enter their subconscious through trapping his victims inside a dream world within the Upside Down. Freddy Krueger also haunts his victims' minds through their dreams, luring them into a nightmare dreamscape where he murders them in hideous fashion. Both Freddy Krueger and Vecna's power increases dramatically within the dream world, which they are able to shape and manipulate at will. In both Stranger Things and A Nightmare on Elm Street, dying in the dream world results in actual death. Outside of the dream realm, Vecna and Freddy's power decreases within everyday waking reality, which is why they try to prevent their victims from regaining consciousness. Since their strength lies in dreams, both Vecna and Freddy Krueger occupy their victims' subconscious, torturing their victims through manifesting their deepest fears and desires. And Vecna's method of bursting his victims' eyeballs is, a good way to prevent them from regaining consciousness. Oh my god, that was so gross. Both Vecna and Freddy are child killers. They target the teenage youth in their communities, embodying a psychological terror deeply rooted in childhood trauma. For example, child Henry Creel, who would become Vecna, used his psychic powers to torment his father, Victor, with his past war trauma. In this scene, Victor sees a horrifying vision of a baby's crib catching fire, which he callously left in the fireplace. I'm not sure quite what to make of this scene, but I see it kinda as Henry/Vecna as exposing the dark side of the parent-child bond and the nuclear family structure. Horror here is not something external, but is found within the home, lurking within the dark recesses of our subconscious. Vecna and Freddy also share a similar character arc. They were both originally human before they transformed into supernatural bogeymen. Freddy was burned alive by the vengeful parents of his victims and then returned as a psychopathic ghost. Vecna was born a human with telekinetic abilities. A series of traumatic events instilled in him a hatred of humanity, which led to his later transformation into an interdimensional monster. I find it interesting that the source of their darkness originates within their human nature. During their human life, both Vecna and Freddy were monsters before undergoing their demonic transformations. Their final horrific forms are just a more intense manifestation of the monstrosity already lurking within their human nature. While both Vecna and Freddy are extraordinarily cruel and sadistic, they do have some major differences. Vecna is tonally one note throughout. He is a sad, grim, and lonely figure in contrast to Freddy, who is known for his dark humor and funny, sardonic quips. While Vecna haunts his victims' minds, he isn't shown, like Freddy, to enter their dreams or attack them while they are sleeping.
While Freddy is clothed, wearing his trademark hat, red and green striped shirt, and brown leather clawed gloves, Vecna is naked and stripped of his human garments. Vecna's physical manifestation is more intense, bearing little semblance to his human self. In this sense, Vecna also has a horrifying otherness to his monstrosity. Vecna transforms into something beyond the human, while Freddy manifests a familiar human kind of evil. Vecna's horror moves beyond the purely human to a cosmic level, which fits his character as an agent of the Lovecraftian, spider-like entity, the Mind Flayer. 2. Pennywise. Stephen King's It has influenced Stranger Things in several notable ways. The plot of a small town haunted by an ancient otherworldly evil, which squares off against a small group of traumatized teens, has been one of the biggest draws in Stranger Things, an idea made iconic in Stephen King's novel, It. So it's no surprise that the Duffer Brothers took another nod from Stephen King when conceiving the main antagonist in Season 4. In the novel, It, Pennywise is the name given to the malevolent force plaguing a small town in Maine. Pennywise is a shapeshifter. He can take on many forms, but primarily appears in the form of a demonic clown, who, like Vecna and Freddy, preys upon the youth. Pennywise's power increases in strength the more he, or really it, feeds off the fear and trauma of his victims. Like Pennywise, Vecna also becomes more powerful through weakening and haunting his victims with their past trauma. They both open the doors of the subconscious, fracturing the minds of their victims, manifesting their fears, and thus destroying their sense of identity and reality. Vecna's cursing of Max is a good example of the psychic terror he wields. In the Upside Down, Vecna appears to Max as her brother, Billy, forcing her to relive his horrifying death. Billy tells her that she wished for his death. I see Vecna here as tapping into a darkness within Max to psychologically cripple her, dividing her against herself.
And speaking of Billy, I do kind of miss that guy. Let's face it, honestly, I would have loved to see what would have happened between him and Nancy's mom.
In his final form, Pennywise takes the form of a monstrous spider. Vecna also has a spider connection. When human, he found a strange comfort in the Black Widows living inside the bathroom's vent in his family home, who, like him, were wrongly judged by human society, and yet the most important of the predators. Also, Vecna holds himself up with spider-like tentacles, which is perhaps a vestige of his childhood fascination with spiders. Also, as an agent of the Mind Flayer, it would make sense that Vecna would adapt to his new surroundings by evolving insect-like traits. Vecna also bears similar traits to the last horror icon on the list. 3. Pinhead. Pinhead is the main villain of Clive Barker's Hellraiser franchise. He is the leader of the Cenobites, who are humans turned into demons dedicated to the practice of sadomasochism. He is basically a goth fetish fantasy come to life, decked out in a leather fetish robe with piercings and wounds across the exposed parts of the skin. His defining feature is, of course, his pinhead, where his entire head is marked with grid lines, each intersecting line marked with an iron nail. Like Vecna, Pinhead was also once a man, a captain of the British forces in World War I, who dealt with his war trauma through pursuing a life of depravity and hedonism. After summoning the Cenobites by means of a magical box called the Lament configuration, he was transformed into Pinhead. Pinhead's appearance conveys a deranged sense of order and precision. He has a philosophy and rationality to what he does, which distinguishes him from other horror icons. His cruel methods are hideous experiments in body horror. For Pinhead, death is not an end, but a transformation and reorganization of the body in a different form. Pinhead approaches his sadomasochistic experiments as both an artist and scientist, describing himself and his fellow Cenobites as, quote, explorers in the further regions of experience. In his human childhood, Vecna also describes himself as an explorer who can enter people's minds and see into their past. Like Pinhead, he also has a philosophy behind his actions. He admires spiders because they provide a sense of order to the weak. Life for him is a twisted Darwinian scenario where only the strong survive and the weak perish as lesser beings in the service of evolution.
I found Vecna just a really good creation, and I thought he was a wonderful homage to the 80s in the best possible way, particularly in the special effects used to bring him to life on screen. Barry Gower, the makeup artist who designed the Night King in Game of Thrones, was hired to do the prosthetic and makeup work on Vecna, and it came out really well. It's been reported that like 90% of the effects were all practical with just a little digital modification. And so I think that little blend of digital with the practical worked brilliantly with the show, and particularly in an 80s centric show like this that wants to look back and honor what came before it, and also on the level of the technical effects used, so honoring those kind of practical effects. And there's a certain nostalgia that comes from it, but for me too, actual physical effects just are more immersive for me. They even if they're a little campy or shoddy, I get more of a reaction out of them because they're actually there. It's something like visceral that you can touch. So loved Vecna, and I want to see more of him in part 2 of Stranger Things, so I'm looking forward to that. So anyway, hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.